The whispers started before Nora Palmer even reached her seat, rising like a snake's hiss through the wooden pews of Silver Creek Church. It was May of 1875, and in a town where reputation was everything, Nora's had been shattered beyond repair. As she walked down the aisle in her modest blue dress, the only decent one she had left since her father's death, the congregation's eyes bore into her like hot pokers, their judgment heavier than the Bible in Reverend Holcomb's hands. "The nerve of her, Mrs." Garrett whispered loudly enough for Nora to hear, not bothering to hide her disdain. "Coming to the Lord's house after what she's done." Nora kept her chin up, though her heart hammered against her ribs. At 22, she had already endured more than most women twice her age. The death of both parents within a year, the subsequent loss of their small ranch to debts, and now the most damning of all accusations of impropriety with the married bank manager who had mysteriously forgiven the last of her father's debts before she was evicted. She hadn't done what they accused her of. But in Silver Creek, perception was reality. Nora slid into the last pew, as far from the others as possible, clutching her worn leather prayer book like a shield. She felt rather than saw someone slide in beside her, probably old Mrs. Henderson, the only soul in town who still spoke to her with kindness. But when she turned, she found herself looking into the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Morning, madam," the stranger said quietly, tipping his hat slightly. His face was sun-bronzed and weathered, though he couldn't be much older than 30. A stranger, then, someone who didn't know her story. "Good morning," she whispered back, grateful for the small courtesy but wary of being seen conversing with a man. The last thing she needed was more fuel for the town's gossip. Reverend Holcomb cleared his throat at the pulpit, his gaze sweeping over the congregation until it landed on Nora. His expression hardened, and what came next would change the course of her life forever. "Brothers and sisters," he began, his voice carrying through the church. "Today we gather to celebrate the Lord's goodness, His mercy, His judgment upon the wicked." His eyes didn't leave Nora as he spoke, and she felt herself shrinking into the hard wooden bench. "The book teaches us that sin cannot hide in the light of day, that those who defile the sanctity of marriage, who sell their virtue for earthly gain." He paused meaningfully. "These sinners must be cast out lest they poison the whole flock." The stranger beside Nora shifted slightly, his shoulders tensing. "I believe," continued the Reverend, his voice rising, "that there are those among us today who have no place in God's house until they have truly repented." Mrs. Garrett turned in her pew, facing Nora directly. "He means you, harlot," she hissed, loud enough for half the church to hear. A ripple of shocked gasps, followed by titters and outright laughter, spread through the congregation. Nora felt her face flame with humiliation as tears threatened to spill. She had come seeking comfort in the only place that had always given her solace, only to be publicly shamed. She gathered her skirts, ready to flee, when the stranger beside her stood up. "Seems to me," he said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the suddenly hushed church, "the good book also has plenty to say about casting the first stone." Every head turned to the back pew. The stranger stood tall, his broad shoulders straight beneath a worn leather vest. His hat was off now, revealing sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Who are you to speak in this house?" demanded Reverend Holcomb. "Name's Tucker Zimmerman," he replied evenly. "Just rode into town yesterday. Thought I'd pay my respects to the Lord before starting work at the Hamilton Ranch." He looked around the church. Didn't realize respect was in such short supply here. Nora stared at him in shock. No one had stood up for her in months, not since the rumors began. "Mr. Zimmerman," the Reverend's voice turned cold, "you are new here and do not understand our ways. This woman," Tucker interrupted, "came to worship same as anybody else." His eyes scanned the congregation. "And from where I'm standing, she's the only one here actually following the Lord's teachings about forgiveness and turning the other cheek." Murmurs rose again, but Tucker wasn't finished. He turned to Nora and offered his arm. "Madam, I believe we've both heard enough preaching for one day. Would you allow me to escort you out?" Nora hesitated, knowing that leaving with this stranger would only fuel more gossip. But staying seemed unbearable. With trembling fingers, she placed her hand on his offered arm. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman," she said softly. Together they walked down the aisle past the glaring faces and whispered slurs. When they reached the church doors, Tucker pushed them open, letting in a flood of May sunshine. Nora stepped out into the light, feeling as though she could breathe freely for the first time in months. Behind them, the church erupted into chaos as they descended the steps. "I apologize if I made things worse," Tucker said once they were beyond the churchyard. "They couldn't be worse," Nora replied with a sad smile. "But I thank you for your kindness, Mr. Zimmerman. It's been rare these days." "Tucker, please," he hesitated. "I don't mean to pry, but you're wondering what terrible sin I've committed to deserve such treatment." Nora sighed, stopping beneath the shade of an oak tree. "I'm wondering why a town that claims to be Christian would treat anyone that way," he corrected her. Nora studied him, trying to determine if his concern was genuine. Something in his steady gaze told her it was. "I refused the advances of Mr. Reynolds, the bank manager," she said finally. "After my father died last year, the bank was set to take our ranch. Suddenly, Reynolds forgave the remaining debt. People assumed I paid him in other ways. When his wife found letters he'd written to me, improper letters, I never answered. She spread the word that I'd seduced him." Tucker's jaw tightened. "And no one believed your side. Why would they? I'm a woman with no family, no money, no position. Reynolds is a wealthy, respected man with connections to every business in the county." She laughed bitterly. "In their eyes, I must be guilty. Where do you live now?" "I work for Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house. She lets me have a small room in exchange for cooking and cleaning." Nora shook her head. "I should get back. She'll expect me to help with Sunday dinner." "Allow me to walk with you," Tucker offered. They walked in companionable silence through the quiet streets. Sunday morning in Silver Creek meant most folks were either at church or preparing dinner, leaving the main street nearly deserted. "You said you're working at the Hamilton place?" Nora asked eventually. Tucker nodded. "Old Sam hired me on as foreman. I worked a ranch down in Texas for 10 years, learned the business inside and out." "Sam's a good man," Nora said. "One of the few who still treats me kindly, though his wife won't allow him to speak to me in public." When they reached the boarding house, Tucker removed his hat. "Miss Palmer, would it be too forward to call on you sometime? Perhaps next Sunday?" Nora felt a flutter in her chest, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope, perhaps, or something more dangerous. "Mr. Zimmerman, Tucker, you're kind, but associating with me will only damage your reputation in this town. You've just arrived, you have a good position. Don't ruin it for a woman everyone believes is fallen." His blue eyes held hers. "I've never much cared what others think. And I prefer to make up my own mind about people." Before she could respond, the boarding house door opened, and Mrs. Wilson appeared, her thin face pinched with disapproval. "Nora, inside now. I won't have you consorting with strange men on my doorstep." Nora flushed. "Mrs. Wilson, this is Mr. Zimmerman, the new foreman at the Hamilton Ranch." Mrs. Wilson's expression changed slightly. A man with a respectable position was a different matter. "Well, good day to you, Mr. Zimmerman. Nora, the potatoes need peeling." "Good day, Miss Palmer," Tucker said formally, replacing his hat. "I hope to see you again soon." As he walked away, Nora couldn't help but watch him go. For the first time since her world had collapsed, she felt a small spark of something that felt dangerously like hope. The following week passed in a blur of drudgery for Nora. She rose before dawn to start breakfast for the boarders, spent her days cleaning, cooking, and mending, and collapsed into bed each night with aching feet and raw hands. But something had changed. The memory of Tucker's kindness sustained her through Mrs. Wilson's cutting remarks and the boarders' cold shoulders. On Friday afternoon, as Nora was hanging laundry in the yard, a voice called her name. She turned to see Emma Rogers, once her closest friend, standing at the gate. "Emma," Nora said cautiously, smoothing her apron. They hadn't spoken in months, not since Emma's husband had forbidden their friendship. "I shouldn't be here," Emma said nervously, glancing over her shoulder, "but I had to warn you, warn me. It's about that cowboy, the one who walked out of church with you." Emma lowered her voice. People are talking, Reynolds especially. He's spreading word that you found your next patron. Nora felt ice in her veins. That's ridiculous. I barely know Mr. Zimmerman. Be that as it may, Reynolds is furious. He's telling everyone that Zimmerman only came to town to be with you, that you've been writing to him for months. Emma bit her lip. He's saying terrible things, Nora. That you're trying to trap another respectable man, that you won't be satisfied until you've ruined every marriage in town. But that's absurd. Tucker, Mr. Zimmerman just arrived last week. I know that, but people believe what they want to believe. Emma reached through the gate, squeezing Nora's hand. I never believed the rumors, Nora. I know you better than that, but Martin wouldn't let me say so publicly. Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. Thank you for that, at least. There's more, Emma said. Reynolds has been to see Mr. Hamilton. He's trying to get Tucker fired before he's properly started. Anger flared in Nora's chest. That man won't be satisfied until I'm driven out of town entirely. Or until you give him what he wants, Emma said darkly. Be careful, Nora. Reynolds is a powerful man with a fragile ego. After Emma left, Nora finished the laundry mechanically, her mind racing. She needed to warn Tucker about the rumors, to give him the chance to distance himself from her before his reputation was tarnished too. That evening, after dinner was served and the kitchen cleaned, Nora slipped out the back door of the boarding house. The sun was setting as she made her way toward the Hamilton Ranch, which lay about a mile outside of town. It was improper for her to visit a man alone, especially at this hour, but she had no choice. The ranch house came into view just as twilight was deepening into night. Lights glowed in the windows, and Nora hesitated at the edge of the yard. What if Mrs. Hamilton answered the door? The woman had made it clear months ago that Nora was no longer welcome in her home. Before she could decide what to do, the door to the bunkhouse opened, and Tucker emerged, carrying a lantern. He spotted her immediately. Miss Palmer. He covered the ground between them in long strides. Is everything all right? I'm sorry to come unannounced, she said, suddenly aware of how improper her actions were, but I needed to speak with you urgently. Tucker gestured toward a bench near the barn, setting his lantern beside it. Please sit, you look exhausted. She sat gratefully, her legs trembling from the long walk and her own nervousness. Mr. Zimmerman, Tucker, please. Tucker, she amended with a small smile. I've come to warn you, Mr. Reynolds is spreading rumors about us, about me specifically. He's saying that we've been involved for months, that you came to town specifically for me. Tucker's expression darkened. I've already heard. Old Sam told me this afternoon when Reynolds came by to suggest he reconsider hiring me. Oh no, Nora's hand flew to her mouth. Did Mr. Hamilton fire me? Tucker chuckled. No, Sam's known Reynolds too long to trust him. Said he figured any man Reynolds hated was probably worth keeping around. Relief flooded through her. Thank goodness. But still, it's only a matter of time before the rumors affect you too. Perhaps it would be better if we didn't associate with each other. Tucker studied her for a long moment. Is that what you want, Miss Palmer? No, she admitted softly, but I won't be responsible for ruining your fresh start here. I appreciate your concern, he said, his voice gentle. But I'm a grown man who can make his own decisions about who deserves my friendship. He paused. And I think you do very much. Something in his voice made her heart skip a beat. Why would you risk your reputation for someone you barely know? Tucker leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. When I was 15, my mother was accused of stealing from the general store where she worked. The whole town turned against her, even though she'd never taken a thing in her life. No one would hire her, the church asked her not to attend. It broke her. She died less than a year later, and I've always believed it was from a broken heart as much as the consumption. I'm so sorry, Nora whispered. Ever since, I've had no patience for town gossips and those who'd condemn without evidence. His blue eyes held hers. So you see, Miss Palmer, I understand something of what you're facing. And I won't abandon you to face it alone simply because some banker with a bruised ego wants to spread lies. Before Nora could respond, a door slammed at the main house, and Sam Hamilton's voice called out, Tucker. You out there? I should go, Nora said quickly, standing. Let me walk you back to town, Tucker insisted. No, that would only make things worse if someone saw us. She touched his arm briefly. "Thank you for understanding and for believing me." "Nora," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "I'll call on you Sunday after church if you'll allow it." Despite everything, Nora smiled. "I'd like that." She slipped away into the darkness, her heart lighter than it had been in months despite the growing complications. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of spring blossoms through town. Nora rose early as usual to prepare breakfast for the boarders, but today she moved with a lightness that hadn't been present in months. The prospect of seeing Tucker again filled her with both anticipation and anxiety. She didn't attend church this Sunday, the memory of last week's humiliation still too fresh, but she watched from the boarding house window as the congregation filed in, Tucker among them. Even from a distance, his tall figure was unmistakable. 2 hours later, as the service ended and people spilled onto the street, Nora busied herself in the kitchen, trying to appear unconcerned. Mrs. Wilson had gone to her sister's for the afternoon, leaving Nora alone with instructions to prepare a cold supper for the 3 remaining boarders. A knock at the door made her heart leap. She wiped her hands on her apron, checked her reflection quickly in the small mirror in the hall, and opened the door. Tucker stood on the porch, hat in hand, wearing a clean shirt and his best trousers. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly shaved that morning. "Miss Palmer," he said formally, aware they might be observed, "I wondered if you might accompany me for a walk." "I'd be delighted, Mr. Zimmerman. Let me get my shawl." They walked side by side down the main street, conscious of the stares and whispers that followed them. Tucker kept a respectful distance between them, though his presence beside her felt like a shield against the town's judgment. "I thought we might visit the creek," he suggested. "It's quiet there and we could talk without an audience." Nora hesitated. Going somewhere secluded with Tucker would only feed the rumors, but the prospect of a few hours away from judgmental eyes was too tempting to resist. "That sounds lovely," she said. The creek lay just beyond the edge of town, a peaceful spot where willows dipped their branches into the clear water. As children, Nora and her friends had spent countless summer days splashing in its shallows. Now, as they settled on a grassy bank beneath a willow, those carefree days seemed a lifetime ago. "I wanted to thank you again," Nora said, arranging her skirts around her, "for standing up for me last week. No one's done that in a long time." Tucker leaned back on his elbows, his long legs stretched out before him. "No thanks needed. It was the right thing to do." He glanced at her. "How long have the rumors been going on?" Nora sighed, plucking a blade of grass. "Almost 6 months now. After my father died, I tried to save our ranch. I approached Reynolds about extending our loan. At first, he seemed sympathetic, professional. Then his letters became increasingly personal. When I rejected his advances, he claimed I had led him on, that I had promised him favors in exchange for financial help. And people believed him over you." His wife found the letters. She showed them all over town, but only his later ones, not my responses refusing him. She made it seem as though I'd been encouraging him. Nora's voice trembled. "By the time I realized what was happening, my reputation was already destroyed." Tucker's expression hardened. "That's not just gossip, Nora, that's slander. It doesn't matter now, the damage is done." She met his eyes. "But I won't let the same happen to you. Perhaps we shouldn't be seen together so publicly." Instead of answering, Tucker reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden object. "I made this for you," he said, holding it out. It was a delicately carved flower, a wild rose, its petals and leaves rendered with surprising detail. "It's beautiful," she whispered, taking it carefully. "My father taught me to whittle when I was a boy, said it was good for patience." Tucker smiled. "I've been working on this all week. Reminds me of you, beautiful but strong enough to grow even in difficult places." Nora traced the wooden petals with her fingertip, deeply touched by the gesture. "Thank you. It's been a long time since anyone gave me a gift." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek's gentle murmur and the birds singing in the trees. For the first time in months, Nora felt a sense of peace. "Tell me about your life before," Tucker said eventually. "Before all this started." Nora's face softened with memories. My father raised me alone after my mother died in childbirth. He was a good man, honest, hardworking. We had a small ranch just north of town, nothing fancy, but it was home. She smiled sadly. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to love books. We didn't have much, but we were happy. What happened? He got sick last winter, pneumonia. By the time he recovered, he'd lost so much time that the ranch fell behind. Then the drought came and we lost half our cattle. Nora shook her head. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to save it, had a heart attack in the fields one day. By the time I found him, it was too late. Tucker reached out, covering her hand with his. I'm sorry, Nora. His touch was warm, comforting. Nora didn't pull away. What about you? She asked. You mentioned Texas? Tucker nodded. Grew up in a small town outside Dallas. After my mother died, I worked odd jobs until I was old enough to hire on as a proper cowhand. Spent 10 years with the Circle T outfit, worked my way up to foreman. He gazed out at the creek, but I always wanted my own place someday. When I heard Sam Hamilton was looking for a foreman, with the possibility of buying in as a partner eventually, it seemed like the right time to move on. And now you're caught up in town drama because of me, Nora said ruefully. Tucker squeezed her hand gently. I'm exactly where I choose to be. The look in his eyes made her breath catch. There was something tender there, something that spoke of more than simple friendship or charity. Tucker, she began uncertainly. A shout from the path interrupted her. There they are. Nora jerked her hand away from Tucker's as 3 figures emerged from the trees. Mr. Reynolds, Sheriff Davis, and to her horror, Mrs. Wilson. See, Reynolds gestured wildly. Meeting in secret, just as I said. The woman is a menace to decent society, Mrs. Wilson's thin face was contorted with righteous indignation. Nora Palmer. To think I took you in, gave you honest work, and all the while you were sneaking off to meet men. In my 20 years running a respectable boarding house, I have never been so deceived. Tucker stood, helping Nora to her feet. There's been no deception here, madam. Miss Palmer and I were simply enjoying the fine weather. Sheriff Davis, a heavy-set man with a perpetually weary expression, sighed. Mr. Zimmerman, you're new in town, so I'll speak plain. This woman has a history of improper relations with men. For your own good, you should steer clear. Sheriff, Tucker's voice was dangerously quiet. I'd be careful about making accusations without proof. Reynolds stepped forward, his face flushed. Proof? I have proof enough. Letters she wrote me promising all manner of— That's a lie, Nora cried. I never wrote you anything of the sort. Nevertheless, Mrs. Wilson cut in coldly, you violated the terms of your employment, Nora. Sneaking out, meeting a man unchaperoned, it's unconscionable. I won't have it. You'll pack your things and be gone by nightfall. Nora felt the blood drain from her face. Mrs. Wilson, please, where will I go? I have nowhere. You should have thought of that before, the older woman snapped. This is ridiculous, Tucker said, his anger barely contained. Miss Palmer has done nothing wrong, and you all know it. Reynolds sneered. Oh, she's got you fooled too, has she? Just like she fooled me at first. Trust me, Zimmerman, she's only after what you can give her. Your protection, your money. Tucker moved so fast that Reynolds had no time to react. In an instant, the banker found himself lifted by his lapels until his feet barely touched the ground. Mr. Zimmerman, Sheriff Davis barked. Release him immediately. Not until he takes back his lies, Tucker growled. Tucker, don't, Nora pleaded, touching his arm. It's not worth it. Slowly, Tucker set Reynolds down, though his eyes never left the banker's face. You're lucky Miss Palmer is a better person than you deserve, he said quietly. But this ends now, the rumors, the lies, all of it. Reynolds straightened his jacket, his face mottled with rage and embarrassment. You're finished in this town, Zimmerman. I'll see to that personally. You're welcome to try, Tucker replied evenly. Sheriff Davis stepped between them. That's enough, both of you. Reynolds, Mrs. Wilson, I suggest you head back to town. I'll escort these two to ensure there's no further impropriety. As Reynolds and Mrs. Wilson retreated down the path, Tucker turned to Nora. I'm sorry, he said softly. I've made things worse. No, she shook her head. You stood up for me again. She glanced toward town, fear creeping into her voice. But I don't know what I'll do now. Without a position, without a home. Tucker took her hands in his, ignoring the sheriff's disapproving grunt. Nora, listen to me. This town has treated you shamefully, but you don't have to stay and endure it. Come with me to the Hamilton Ranch, Mrs. Hamilton needs help with the house and the cooking. I've already spoken to her about you. You have? Nora's eyes widened. After church today, she said she's never believed the rumors and she'd be glad for the help. Tucker's blue eyes were earnest. It would be respectable work away from town gossip. Hope blossomed in Nora's chest, but caution tempered it. What about Mr. Reynolds? His influence doesn't extend to the Hamiltons. Sam owns his land free and clear, doesn't owe the bank a penny. Tucker smiled. Will you come? Nora looked toward town, the place that had once been her home, now a source of nothing but pain and humiliation. Then she looked at Tucker, this man who had appeared in her life so suddenly and changed everything with his simple act of kindness. Yes, she said finally, I will. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of change for Nora. Life at the Hamilton Ranch was vastly different from the boarding house. Mrs. Hamilton Alice was a kind, no-nonsense woman who put Nora to work immediately but treated her with respect. The ranch hands, taking their cue from Tucker and the Hamiltons, were unfailingly polite. For the first time in months, Nora slept soundly at night, free from the weight of constant scrutiny and judgment. Tucker was a constant presence, though always proper and respectful. They often found themselves working side by side, Nora helping with the garden while Tucker mended nearby fences, or sharing quiet conversation over coffee when their daily tasks were done. Slowly, cautiously, Nora allowed herself to believe that perhaps this fresh start was real. That perhaps Tucker's growing interest in her was genuine. One evening in early June, as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Tucker found Nora sitting on the porch swing, her mending forgotten in her lap as she watched the distant mountains. Beautiful evening, he said, settling beside her. It is, she agreed, smiling. I was just thinking how peaceful it is here. Content then? Tucker asked, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Very much so. Alice has been wonderful and the work suits me. She glanced at him. And you? Still happy with your position? Tucker nodded. Sam's talking about letting me buy into the ranch next spring if all goes well. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. Nora, there's something I've been meaning to ask you. The seriousness in his tone made her pulse quicken. Yes. Sunday after next, would you accompany me to church in Silver Creek? Of all the questions she'd imagined, this wasn't one of them. Church, in town? Tucker, you know what happened last time. I do, he said firmly, and that's precisely why we should go together, head held high. But the gossip, the stares, will continue whether we hide from them or not. Tucker took her hand. Nora, you've done nothing wrong, yet you've been living like a fugitive. It's time to show this town that their rumors have no power over you, over us. Us. The word hung in the air between them. Tucker's eyes softened. Yes, us, because I care for you, Nora, more than I should, perhaps, having known you such a short time, but I do. Joy bubbled up inside her, mixed with fear. I care for you too, she admitted, but I'm afraid, Tucker. Afraid of what they'll say, what they'll do. We'll face it together, he promised. And after church, I have somewhere special I want to take you. 2 Sundays later, Nora stood before the mirror in her room, adjusting the bonnet that Alice had insisted on lending her. The dress was new, a simple but pretty blue calico that Tucker had brought from the mercantile in town, refusing to say how much it had cost or allow her to repay him. A knock at the door announced Alice's presence. You look lovely, dear, the older woman said warmly. Tucker's waiting outside with the buggy. Nora's stomach twisted with nerves. I'm not sure I can do this, Alice. Now you listen to me, Alice said firmly, taking Nora's hands. That town treated you shamefully, based on nothing but gossip and a man's wounded pride. You have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to hide from. And besides, her eyes twinkled, you won't be going alone. True to her word, Alice and Sam were already seated in their own buggy when Nora emerged from the house. Tucker stood waiting beside a smaller one, dressed in his Sunday best, his hat in his hands. You look beautiful, he said simply, helping her up into the seat. The ride to town was filled with nervous anticipation. Nora's knuckles were white where she gripped her prayer book, and Tucker reached over once to cover her hand with his own. It'll be all right, he promised. The church was already filling when they arrived. Heads turned as Tucker helped Nora down from the buggy, and whispers immediately followed. The Hamiltons joined them, flanking Nora like protective sentries as they walked toward the church steps. Mr. Reynolds and his wife stood near the entrance, their faces darkening at the sight of Nora. Reynolds stepped forward as if to block their path. "This is a house of God," he said coldly. "Some people don't belong here." Before Tucker could respond, Sam Hamilton stepped forward. "Then perhaps you should leave, Reynolds. I reckon the Lord has more patience for an innocent young woman than for a man who bears false witness against his neighbors." Reynolds sputtered in outrage, but the arrival of Reverend Holcomb prevented further confrontation. "Good morning," the Reverend said, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of Nora. "Welcome, all of you." Nora held her breath, waiting for the condemnation, the public shaming that had driven her away before. Instead, the Reverend simply nodded and gestured toward the doors. "Service is about to begin," he said. Inside, Nora was acutely aware of the stares and whispers as Tucker led her to a pew near the middle of the church, not hiding in the back, but not boldly taking the front either. The Hamiltons sat beside them, a united front against the curious and judgmental gazes. The service itself passed in a blur for Nora. She sang the hymns mechanically, bowed her head for prayers, but her mind was too full of anxiety to truly focus. It was only when the Reverend began his sermon that her attention snapped back to the present. "Today," Reverend Holcomb announced, "I wish to speak about judgment, not God's judgment, but our own." His eyes swept the congregation. "We are quick to condemn, slow to forgive, quick to believe the worst of others, slow to seek the truth." Nora felt Tucker stiffen beside her. "This couldn't be coincidence. Last night," the Reverend continued, "I received a visitor, a man of considerable standing in this community who came to confess a grave sin." He paused meaningfully. "A sin not of passion or greed, but of pride and falsehood. A sin that has caused great suffering to an innocent person among us." Murmurs rippled through the church. Nora's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. This man admitted to spreading false rumors about a young woman in our town. Admitted that these rumors were born not of truth, but of wounded pride when his improper advances were rejected. Nora gasped softly. Beside her, Tucker reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Reverend Holcomb's gaze found Nora. "Miss Palmer, on behalf of this congregation and this town, I must offer our deepest apologies. We failed you. We judged without knowledge, condemned without cause, and turned our backs when you most needed Christian charity." Tears filled Nora's eyes as the Reverend's words washed over her. Throughout the church, people shifted uncomfortably, some looking ashamed, others confused or disbelieving. "As for the man who confessed," the Reverend continued, "he has promised to make a public apology and to leave Silver Creek. His position at the bank will be filled by the end of the month." After the service, people filed out in unusual silence. A few approached Nora hesitantly, Emma Rogers among them, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her old friend and begged forgiveness. Others nodded awkwardly, unable to meet her eyes but unwilling to continue their open hostility. "You knew," Nora said to Tucker as they left the church. "You knew Reynolds had confessed." Tucker nodded. "Sam and I paid him a visit last night, suggested that his conscience might be lighter if he told the truth before leaving town." "Leaving town," Nora echoed. "Seems he's been offered a position in Denver," Tucker said with a small smile. "Very suddenly. Did you threaten him?" "Not at all. Just pointed out that Sam has friends on the bank's board of directors, and that certain inconsistencies in the bank's books might come to light if a thorough examination were conducted." Tucker's eyes twinkled. Reynolds decided a fresh start elsewhere might be best for everyone. Outside the church, Tucker helped Nora into the buggy, then climbed up beside her. Instead of following the Hamiltons back to the ranch, however, he turned the horse in the opposite direction. "Where are we going?" Nora asked. "I told you I had somewhere special to take you," Tucker reminded her. They drove north out of town, following a familiar road that made Nora's heart ache with memory. When they crested the final hill and her father's ranch came into view, she couldn't suppress a small cry of recognition. "Tucker, why, just wait," he said softly. The ranch looked different than when Nora had last seen it. The fields were newly plowed, the fences mended, and fresh paint brightened the small farmhouse. As they pulled into the yard, Nora noticed new curtains in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney. "What is this?" she whispered. Tucker helped her down from the buggy, leading her toward the house. After Reynolds confessed last night, he signed some papers. One was his resignation from the bank, another was the deed to this property. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "This is for you, Nora." With trembling hands, she took the paper and unfolded it. It was indeed the deed to her father's ranch, now in her name. "I don't understand," she said, tears blurring her vision. "How?" Sam helped. "He's been on the bank's board for years, though he rarely attends meetings." Once Reynolds admitted what he'd done, how he'd forced you off the property by calling in loans that should have been extended, it was clear the ranch was rightfully yours. Tucker gestured to the house. "Sam and I have been working on it for the past week, getting it ready." Nora was speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had happened. Her reputation restored, her property returned, her future suddenly bright with possibility. "There's one more thing," Tucker said, his voice growing serious. He took her hands in his. "Nora Palmer, I know we haven't known each other long by most standards, but I've seen your strength, your kindness, your dignity in the face of cruelty. I've come to care for you more deeply than I thought possible." He sank to one knee, still holding her hands. "I'm a simple man. I don't have much beyond my savings and the promise of a partnership with Sam, but I can offer you respect, honesty, and a love that will only grow stronger with time." He looked up at her, his blue eyes filled with hope. "Will you marry me, Nora? Make a life with me here on your land?" Tears spilled freely down Nora's cheeks now. "Yes," she whispered, her heart so full it might burst. "Yes, Tucker, I will." He stood, gathering her into his arms, and kissed her a kiss full of promise and new beginnings. 1 year later, on a perfect June Sunday, Tucker and Nora Zimmerman sat in the front pew of Silver Creek Church, their infant daughter sleeping peacefully in Nora's arms. The congregation behind them was larger now, the town having grown with the arrival of the railroad 6 months earlier. Reverend Holcomb smiled broadly as he announced the baptism of little Alice Emma Zimmerman, named for the two women who had stood by Nora in her darkest days. As Nora passed her daughter to the Reverend, she caught Tucker's eye. His gaze held the same warmth, the same unwavering support that had first drawn her to him that fateful Sunday when he had walked out of church beside her. "I love you," he mouthed silently. "And I you," she replied, her heart full to overflowing. The Reverend's words washed over them as he blessed the child, but Nora was thinking of a different blessing, the blessing of having been laughed out of church that day, for it had led her to the truest love she could have imagined.